Welcome. This is the A Course in Miracles Palm Beach Study Group for Thursday, July 15, 2021. We are in the text in chapter 4, section 5, page 65. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. The ego exerts maximal vigilance about what it permits into awareness. And this is not the way a balanced mind holds together. The ego is thrown further off balance because it keeps its primary motivation from your awareness and raises control rather than sanity to predominance. The ego has every reason to do this, according to the thought system which gave rise to it and which it serves. Sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego and must be obliterated by the ego in the interest of its self-preservation. So we're starting off saying that all things work together for good. Now that's in spirit. In the spirit world, all things work together for good. And I'll expand upon that even more, because in the spirit world, all things work together for the good of all. That's a primary indication that it's spirit-led, is when it's for the good of all, not just for the good of some. Ego will do things that is for the good of some, but is to the detriment of others. Spirit doesn't work that way. Spirit always finds what is for the good of all. And then it says there are no exceptions in the spirit world except in the ego's judgment. So now we're flipping to the ego world. And the ego exerts maximum vigilance about what it permits into awareness. So that's saying that in the ego mind, it's guarding against such spiritual thoughts and trying to prevent them from even coming into your awareness. And so that's why we have to be so vigilant with our thoughts. When we realize we're thinking ego thoughts, it's very important that we train our mind to stop thinking that way and instead think with spirit thoughts. So if you're thinking, oh, what's good for me? It should be, oh, what's good for everyone, not just me. Hello, Ed. Thank you for joining us. I have muted you. We are on page 65, chapter 4, section 5. And we just got started with the first paragraph. So many times in the Course, it says that the ego mind is insane. It does not think with sanity. And in sentence 6, that is referenced again, sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego. and must be obliterated by the ego. That's the sane judgment. The ego is trying to obliterate it in the interest of its own self-preservation. So paragraph 2. A major source of the ego's off-balance state is its lack of discrimination between the body and the thoughts of God. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego, therefore, either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening to it. Being concerned primarily with its own preservation in the face of threat, the ego perceives them as the same. By perceiving them as the same, the ego attempts to save itself from being swept away, as it would surely be in the presence of knowledge. And knowledge is one of those key words, because knowledge is of the spirit. Perception is of the ego. Knowledge is of the spirit. So a good lesson to learn in studying the Course in Miracles is to understand what the key words are, the words that are talking about spirit and the words that are talking about ego. And the Course tells us quite clearly what those words are. We have covered that in past chapters about the difference between perception and knowledge. So once you're keyed into those key words, it's a lot easier to interpret the Course and what it's saying. Because remember, all of these words can have dual meanings. Knowledge from the ego's point of view is that the American Revolution happened in 1776. But that's not knowledge that the Course is talking about. Knowledge from Spirit's point of view is meaning something that is true, that is of God, such as God is love. That's a true statement of knowledge. So, are there any questions up to this point? Comments, questions? All right, then. So let's go to paragraph 3. Well, Ed, you've got a question? You need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I was just moving a lamp.
Oh.
That's okay. I'm good.
All right, we'll continue then. Paragraph 3. Any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. So, again, the Course teaches that the body is a construct of ego. Spirit exists in the realm of mind. Spirit is not corporeal. Spirit does not have bodies. Bodies are an ego invention. So that's why they're saying the difference here is that any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. Yet this confusion is essential to the ego, which judges only in terms of threat or non-threat to itself. In one sense, the ego's fear of God is at least logical, since the idea of him does dispel the ego. But fear of the body, with which the ego identifies so closely, makes no sense at all. Yes, Ed.
The body, I mean, this has to be a creation of God, the body. Maybe the ego comes along with it, but wouldn't you say that the body came first before the ego?
No. The body is a creation of ego.
The ego can create? I just don't get that. I just don't get that.
When we, the child of God, had a mad thought that we could separate ourselves from our Father, and we fell asleep, and we created the ego, and we created those bodies for ourselves in the ego world. You are not your body. You are immortal spirit, but you're in a body construct that you constructed for yourself along with the ego. And the ego is heavily invested in bodies. The spirit has no investiture in physical bodies whatsoever.
Well, the physical body came about from my mother, and I didn't have an ego at that time. I had no relationship at all with the physical world outside of the womb until I was taking my first breath. So I believe that the ego comes with the world experience, but I don't believe that the ego created the body. That just doesn't make any sense at all to what we are experiencing in life. And we need the body to if we didn't need the body, then why bother having one? I mean, why didn't we just live in the spirit realm all the time and not bother to come to the earth, not bother to be in the body? Why did we need to bother with any of that stuff? It's to me, this is, I don't know, this isn't nice, but it smacks of religion is what it is. It's not the reality that we're experiencing. There's nothing obnoxious about the human body. The cells are part of the universe. We're not, quantum theory and all that stuff, sure, okay, but this is just, there is a reality to the world we're living in while we are here. I can understand the spirit mind and the ego mind, but I have a hard time with the ego creating the body and the ego. I don't know where, there's no devil. Where would the ego come from? That's a story that doesn't seem to hold water with me. I'm sorry, I just can't.
I do understand your point of view. And the best response that I can have for it is that you need to look at the definition of ego. Your using the word ego in the same way Freud would,
Yes.
as a psychological term. The ego, the id, those terms. But that is not how we're using the word ego in the Course. It's a horse of a different color.
Well, the Course has to have some relevance, to our experience. And I somehow or other, I'm just confused with the ego being of a separate power that created the body. The ego can have a counter spiritual relevance, but as far as it's me, and you want to go on with the Course.
Well, no, I mean, you bring up a very valid issue, because there are a lot of people who struggle with this in relation to the Course. And so, the best I can say is that, first of all, Spirit's got nothing against your body. Spirit is not labeling your body bad or immoral or anything, or any other negative judgment on your body. The Spirit is simply saying that you are, in reality, in truth, a spiritual being that has no body. But while you're here in the illusion of the ego world, you appear to be in a body. But Spirit does not consider your body as being real. It considers your body as being part of the illusion, part of the dream.
What about
We've
God's
talked about
creation?
what?
God's creation. I mean, you got squirrels, rabbits, and bears running around with bodies. You know what I mean? It's not like there's anything that's adverse to the Spirit in terms of this corporeal existence. It seems like the ego is something that exists on its own, and I think we can choose to relate to the Spirit or not, and the ego is, this is a difficult explanation. I just why do we even bother dealing with the ego? Why doesn't Jesus just focus on the Spirit? And the rest of this, I guess, we're trying to show us that somehow or other in our world that we have a tendency to be drawn astray of the Spirit. Well, anyway, it's just we've got another 300 pages.
Let me try one more time.
Okay.
The ego is not an entity of its own. The ego is a mental construct that we created, we, all of us. God did not create the world. God did not create the animals. God did not create the universe. We did. The Son of God created all of this. We are the creators. God created us. We created the universe. And with the universe that we created all of everything that is physical. We created the ego construct as a mental in our minds. We created it, not God. God created us. We are also creators. We are the sons of God. We have the same abilities as God to create, and we created the universe. But the universe that we created is not in a spiritual universe. It's a physical universe. It's an ego universe. It's an illusion. It's a dream. From spirit's point of view, it does not exist. We exist, but the world we created does not exist.
As a child, I knew nothing of the universe. The universe is something I learned as I was getting older and growing in knowledge, but it's just, I didn't create the universe. You didn't create the universe. My ego is not the same as your ego, I guess. I don't know.
We are immortal spirits. You're thinking of yourself as a mere schmear human being. You're not thinking of yourself as a child of God. You're not thinking of yourself as an immortal spirit. And you're not thinking of yourself as the oneness, the only child of God. There's only one of us. We appear to be millions and billions, but we're not. There's only one of us. And we created all of this, but there's only one of us that did it. And so we're not the mere schmear human beings that we think we are. And that's what we're trying, that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to change our mindset and realize that we're not who we thought we are.
Well,
we're not who we've been taught we are.
I feel like a son of God. I feel like I'm a spirit, but I just don't understand how I don't know, somehow this doesn't, it just, I mean, you know, like I said before, what made sense to me some time ago when I was watching that old World War II movie or whatever it was, you've got 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot on the earth. I just don't see man as creating anything. Couldn't create the universe, couldn't create, I just don't see it. I think we are of creation, and we didn't create anything.
All right. Okay.
Hey,
things on this earth, but
all right. Let's see. David wants to chime in. David, what do you have to say?
what I'd like to say is, Ed, we created this mess together, all of us. This ego, we are one. John was basically saying it, but all of us together created this big mess that the world is in. So we all got to work harder and take this course. I'm going to hang up now.
Thank you, David.
All right.
All right. Well, let's
ahead.
move on then. Let's just go ahead. We're on paragraph 4. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe. Since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly. Yet the ego hates the body because it cannot accept it as good enough to be its home. Here is where the mind becomes actually dazed. Being told by the ego that it is really part of the body and that the body is its protector, the mind is also told that the body cannot protect it. Therefore, the mind asks, where can I go for protection? To which the ego replies, turn to me. The mind, and not without cause, reminds the ego that it has itself insisted that it is identified with the body. So there is no point in turning to it for protection. The ego has no real answer to this because there is none. But it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once out of awareness, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. So for those of you who are students of psychology and know about, I think the term is double blind. No, that's a testing point. No, somebody help me out here. Where you're into this contradiction, you've got, these this contradiction. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. That's the kind of thing that the ego likes to put us in. Helene, do you know what the term?
I was just going to say catch-22, but it sounds like you're referring to some, what is it, Hobsonian choice or whatever?
It's, it's between a rock and a hard place, a catch-22. Those are all terms that kind of, but there is a psychological term for it. And I know what it is, I just can't think of it now. It could be a double bind. You're in a double bind situation. Yeah, that is a double bind, not blind. That blind is for experiment when you do but a double bind.
Absolutely, John. I just looked it up. Two irreconcilable choices.
Right. Two irreconcilable choices, a double bind. So that's what the ego does. It puts us in these double binds. And that's why we have a hard time understanding a lot of what the Course is teaching, because we're caught in the double binds that ego's putting our mind in. Would you want to speak, Ed?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. You unmuted yourself. So.
Well, it said to unmute myself, so I did.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I must have pushed that by mistake.
You know what I've noticed? Sometimes when Zoom seems to detect you may be speaking, it tells you to unmute yourself because it thinks you need to be reminded.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Well, I believe we're on paragraph 5. This is the question that must be asked. Where can I go for protection? Seek and ye shall find does not mean that you should seek blindly and desperately for something you would not recognize. Meaningful seeking is consciously undertaken, consciously organized, and consciously directed. The goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. Learning and wanting to learn are inseparable. You learn best when you believe what you are trying to learn is of value to you. However, not everything you may want to learn has lasting value. Indeed, many of the things you want to learn may be chosen because their value will not last. Well, seek and ye shall find, that's what we're doing here by reading this course and trying to unravel its meaning as we go along. Any questions or comments? Paragraph 6. The ego thinks it is an advantage not to commit itself to anything that is eternal, because the eternal must come from God. Eternalness is the one function the ego has tried to develop, but has systematically failed to achieve. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal, just as it does with all issues touching on the real question in any way. By becoming involved with tangential issues, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose. Preoccupations with problems set up to be incapable of solution are favorite ego devices for impeding learning progress. In all these diversionary tactics, however, the one question that is never asked by those who perceive them is, what for? This is the question that you must learn to ask in connection with everything. What is the purpose? Whatever it is, it will direct your efforts automatically. When you make a decision of purpose, then you have made a decision about your future effort, a decision that will remain in effect unless you change your mind. So, what I thought while I was reading this paragraph, going back to our previous conversation, what God creates is eternal. Eternal spirit. That's us, the Son, the child of God. We are eternal spirit. The bodies are not eternal. If God created our bodies, they would be eternal, because everything that God creates is eternal. But nothing in the physical universe is eternal. It's always going around, birth and death, birth and death. Even stars are born and die. So that's an indication there that God did not create this universe, but he did create us, the spiritual beings that we are. And we, as creators, created our bodies, but our creations are not eternal like God's creations are. That's one of the differences between us and God. But we are capable of creating eternally, but we haven't learned to do that yet because we're still stuck in these bodies. And one needs to evolve out of this back into our spiritual selves completely before we'll have that ability. That's my opinion. Are there any other questions, comments?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, why weren't we just created to be eternal in the first place and not bother with all this earthly stuff and all the universe and all that kind of thing? Does the book explain that in terms of purpose? What is the purpose of us being here and experiencing the things we're experiencing?
Well, some would say that the purpose is for learning, that, you know, the universe is a big school and we're learning how to love. We're learning how to be the best that we can be through our various experiences. There are answers like that exist. And your question was, why didn't God create us to be eternal beings in the first place? And my answer to that is, he did. That's what I've been saying. We are eternal spirits. That's who our true selves are. Our higher selves, some call it. Our spiritual selves are eternal spirits. That's one of the reasons for the belief in reincarnation, that I am the eternal spirit and my name is John. And right now I am incarnate in this physical body since the day I was born until the day that I die, but this isn't the first physical body I've been in, and this isn't the last physical body I'll be in, because the I who I am, the eternal higher self of me, the eternal spirit of me, keeps coming back into all one body after another body, after another body, after another body. That's what reincarnation is all about, for the purpose of learning how to transcend out of the body altogether. That's what we're trying to learn. We're trying to learn how to become enlightened beings, to completely transcend the earthly bodily existence and get back to being the eternal spirit in fully that we were created to be in the first place by God.
Well, if we're, did God create anything imperfect?
No.
Well, then why do we need to be down here to go through these experiences to become perfect?
God didn't put us here. We did.
Well, then
God didn't
why
put
are we
us here. We did.
body to body to body and go through all of this? If God didn't create anything imperfect, then he created us as perfect. Then if we're perfect, then why do we need to go through this experience on earth to have and keep coming back in different bodies and all this kind of thing? Why weren't we just perfect to start with and to have the perfect knowledge of eternal love and forgiveness and be happy forever after?
It's all my fault. I did it. I made all of this happen. It's all my fault.
I just got here and realized that, I had these parents and I had this, environment, and that was, that's where I started. I didn't, I went to Sunday school and learned about God and so on and so forth. And it's just, I thought, if I was born, if I was perfect, then why would I need to have this earthly experience? That's my whole question. Why bother? Why aren't I just
You've got to realize that there's two of you. You're thinking of yourself as just one person, an individual person. There's two of you. You are an immortal spirit inside a physical body. There's your higher self, your immortal spirit, and there's you, Ed Tedman, who is this physical body in this incarnation.
Why? Why am I this person in this physical body in this incarnation?
Because you wanted the experience of it.
I had no interest in the experience. I didn't make the
If you go back to before you were born,
choice, you know.
if you go back to before you were born, then you'd realize that you did choose.
I would.
You existed before you were born. You will exist after you die. And you've been here many, many times before. And it is your choice to be here. It's everybody's choice to be here. I think I'm going to suggest that there are some very good books about reincarnation. I suggest that you study that. Moody is one author. Weiss is an author. There's I don't know. I'll loan you some books. I got a whole library of books on reincarnation. It might help you to clarify, but there's lots of stuff online. So, are there any other questions about this? Well, I'm going to go ahead and go on to section 6. We still have some time left. The rewards of God, paragraph 1. The ego does not recognize the real source of threat. And if you associate yourself with the ego, you do not understand the situation as it is. Only your allegiance to it gives the ego any power over you. I have spoken of the ego as if it were a separate thing, acting on its own. This was necessary to persuade you that you cannot dismiss it lightly and must realize how much of your thinking is ego-directed. We cannot safely let it go at that, however, or you will regard yourself as necessarily conflicted as long as you are here, or as long as you believe that you are here. The ego is nothing more than a part of your belief about yourself. Your other life has continued without interruption and has been and always will be totally unaffected by your attempts to disassociate it. And your other life is your spiritual life. So again, we're eternal spiritual beings. Our other lives have continued without interruption. But the ego is nothing more than a part of your belief about yourself. That's why we say that we created the ego. it is nothing more than a part of our beliefs about ourselves. It's not a separate thing. He says earlier, I have spoken of the ego as if it were a separate thing, because he's trying to define and explain to us how the ego works. But now he's saying, but you have to understand that we created it, and it's nothing more than a part of our belief about ourselves. Paragraph 2, in learning to escape from illusions, which is what we're attempting to do here, your debt to your brother is something you must never forget. It is the same debt that you owe to me, the me being Jesus. Whenever you act egotistically towards another, you are throwing away the graciousness of your indebtedness and the holy perception it would produce. The term holy can be used here because as you learn how much you are indebted to the whole sonship, which includes me, you come as close to knowledge as perception can. The gap is then so small that knowledge can easily flow across it and obliterate it forever. The book constantly teaches us that the key here is understanding our oneness. And so how we interact with our brothers and sisters, our debt to our brother is something you must never forget. Our debt to our brother is something we must never forget. And the reason it's the same debt that we owe to Jesus is because he is also one of our brothers. And that's stated quite plainly. Paragraph 3. You have very little trust in me as yet, but it will increase as you turn more and more often to me instead of your ego for guidance. So let's rephrase that a bit. You have very little trust in spirit, but it will increase as you turn more and more to spirit instead of ego for guidance. The results will convince you increasingly that this choice is the only sane one you can make. No one who learns from experience that one choice brings peace and joy, while the other brings chaos and disaster, needs additional convincing. So the choice for spirit brings peace and joy. The choice for ego brings chaos and disaster. Sentence 4. Learning through rewards is more effective than learning through pain, because pain is an ego illusion and can never induce more than a temporary effect. The rewards of God, however, are immediately recognized as eternal. Since this recognition is made by you and not the ego, the recognition itself establishes that you and your ego cannot be identical. You may believe that you have already accepted this difference, but you are by no means convinced it as yet. The fact that you believe you must escape from the ego shows this. But you cannot escape from the ego by humbling it or controlling it or punishing it. Any questions? Paragraph 4. The ego and the spirit do not know each other. The separate mind cannot maintain the separation except by disassociating. Having done this, it denies all truly natural impulses. Not because the ego is a separate thing, but because you want to believe that you are. You want to believe that you are a separate thing. The ego is a device for maintaining this belief, but it is still only your decision to use the device that enables it to endure. So when we think with ego, we are enabling it to endure, to continue. Yes, Helene.
So I have a little bit of a question about the ego and the spirit not knowing each other. I mean, I believe that's part of what we're doing here, right? We're trying to introduce the spirit to the ego, right?
No.
And we're not trying to like introduce the ego to the spirit and the spirit to the ego and to try and like, okay, well, I'm way off base then, but I kind of thought the two needed to know each other for us to move to a point of progression.
No. No.
Oh my.
Here's how it is. The ego exists only in the dream. The Son of God is dreaming. In his dream, he created the universe and the ego and all of the bodies. Spirit is with God, eternal, everlasting, in truth. Spirit sees us sleeping and dreaming, but it is not aware of the dream. It does not see the dream. The ego and the spirit do not know each other.
What does the Bible say about the Son of God creating this?
Nothing.
Okay.
Well, there might be some verses in the New Testament from Jesus, but they're mostly hidden because a lot of Jesus's true teachings were expunged from what we now know as the Bible. Anyway, well, let's not get into that discussion.
By the Roman Catholics.
Well, by whoever.
All right.
So, no, the ego and the spirit do not know each other. But the separate mind cannot maintain the separation except by disassociating. So the separated mind, that's our mind. So we can know spirit because we are spirit, and we can know ego because we created ego. But all of that is happening within the dream that we're experiencing. But spirit only sees us as one. Spirit doesn't see us as being separate from God. Spirit sees us as I've used this symbolism before, that like God's sitting there in the chair next to the bed where his child is asleep and having a nightmare. And God's just sitting there very patiently and lovingly, waiting for us to wake up. And when we do, the nightmare, the dream, will disappear because it's just a dream. Paragraph 5. How can you teach someone the value of something he has deliberately thrown away? He must have thrown it away because he did not value it. You can only show him how miserable he is without it and slowly bring it near so he can learn his misery lessons as he approaches it. This teaches him to associate his misery with its absence and the opposite of misery with its presence. It gradually becomes desirable as he changes his mind about its worth. I am teaching you to associate misery with the ego and joy with the spirit. You have taught yourself the opposite. You are still free to choose, but can you really want the rewards of the ego in the presence of the rewards of God? My trust in you is greater than yours and me at the moment, but it will not always be that way. Your mission is very simple. You are asked to live so as to demonstrate that you are not an ego. And I do not choose God's channels wrongly. The Holy One shares my trust and accepts my atonement decisions because my will is never out of accord with his. I have said before that I am in charge of the atonement. This is only because I completed my part in it as a man and can now complete it through others. My chosen channels cannot fail because I will lend them my strength as long as theirs is wanting. I will go with you to the Holy One, and through my perception, he can bridge the little gap. Your gratitude to your brother is the only gift I want. I will bring it to God for you, knowing that you know your brother is to know God, knowing that to know your brother is to know God. If you are grateful to your brother, you are grateful to God for what he created. Through your gratitude, you come to knowing your brother, and one moment of the real recognition makes everyone your brother because each of them is of your Father. Love does conquer all things. Love does not conquer all things, but it does set all things right. Because you are the kingdom of God, I can lead you back to your own creations. You do not recognize them now, but what has been disassociated is still there. As you come closer to a brother, you approach me. And as you withdraw from him, I become distant to you. Salvation is a collaborative venture. It cannot be undertaken successfully by those who disengage themselves from the sonship, because they are disengaging themselves from me. God will come to you only as you give him to your brothers. Learn first of them, and you will be ready to hear God. That is because the function of love is one. So as we've come to the end of that section, I will ask if there are any more comments or questions. Well, I thank you all for your participation this evening. Ed, did
John?
you want?
Yeah, I'm going to get as far as the property is concerned. I'm sorry I wasn't available. We made a trip to Texas.
Oh, let's not talk that now, please. We're still recording.
I'm sorry.
This is we'll have a chance to talk afterwards.
Okay.
All right, so I guess the big closure here for our lesson tonight is this whole idea of that as you come closer to your brother, you come closer to spirit. And salvation is a collaborative venture. And that's one of the things that we're doing here tonight. We're collaborating with each other in reading through and trying to understand this text, which can be very difficult to understand. Again, because the language is there's dual meanings and different words and terms, and there's concepts that aren't clear and go against what we've been taught in our incarnation, and so it is different, and it takes all of us together to get through it. So I ask for your patience, and I'll say again, if you can't wrap your mind around it, if you don't understand it, just go on. There are things that made sense to you in the past. Sometimes we come into certain passages that aren't clicking, and the best thing to do is just leave it, let it lie, and go on. And then you'll find something more that does click and that does understand. And as you progress through it, because all of these ideas are presented over and over and over and over again through the book. And so you'll have the opportunity to wrap your head around it in the future. So just be patient with it. Don't give up on it, and just take what you can today, leave the rest for tomorrow. That's my advice. So the last line we read, the function of love is one. Namaste. Let's have a moment of silence, please.